My name is Daniil Volkov. I am the Chief Infrastructure Coordinator for Norilsk Municipal Emergency Services. What you are hearing is the official crisis audio log for the city of Norilsk, Krasnoyarsk Krai, Russian Federation. The date is March 9th, the time is 0614 local. I am recording this because our satellite uplink to Krasnoyarsk Regional Command failed at 0400 and is not reconnected. Our fiber trunk went down 11 minutes later. We have one functioning HF radio link routed through Dudinka, and it is intermittent. This log exists because someone outside this city needs to understand what is happening here. And I am not confident our real-time reports are getting through. Let me start with the snow. Norilsk averages 250 centimeters of snowfall across an entire winter season. Between midnight and 0500 this morning, our gauges recorded 158 centimeters of new accumulation. That is 62 inches in 5 hours. I have lived in this city for 31 years, and I want to be precise about this. That number is not unusual. It is impossible. Our meteorological staff confirmed the instruments twice. The rate of fall did not taper. It increased. The snow is still falling. At this volume, the immediate emergencies are structural. Flat roofs on Soviet-era panel buildings are rated for a certain load. We passed that load around 0300. I have 17 buildings across 4 districts flagged for potential roof failure. I have 300 municipal workers total. I have approximately 170,000 residents, most of whom are asleep and have no idea what accumulated above them while they slept. That is the operational picture as of 6 a.m. A freak weather event, a logistics crisis, a staffing shortage in extreme conditions. All of it serious, all of it manageable with enough coordination and enough time. I want this log to reflect that at 0614 on March 9th. I believed this was a weather emergency. I am no longer recording a weather emergency. I will explain why. My first deployment order went out at 0420. I sent a 10-person crew, 2 tracked vehicles, shovels, a portable generator, basic rescue kit to the Oganer district on the eastern edge of the city. 3 residential blocks there are the oldest in Norilsk, Khrushchevka era. Thin walls, flat roofs, minimal reinforcement. If anything was going to buckle under the load, it would be there first. The crew leader was Arkady Petrov. Good man. 15 years in winter emergency response. He grew up in Norilsk. His father worked the nickel smelter until it killed him. Arkady does not panic. I have never heard Arkady raise his voice on a radio channel. The crew reached Oganer at 0509. Travel alone took 49 minutes for a drive that normally takes 12. The tracked vehicles were moving through snow that reached halfway up the cab doors. Arkady reported they had to dig twice just to clear the vehicle intakes. At 0522, Arkady reported that the 3 target buildings were intact, roofs holding, residents inside and unaware. He said his crew would begin clearing the main access road between the buildings so that evacuation vehicles could reach the doors if needed. At 0541, Arkady reported something I initially logged as a communication error. He said his crew had been digging a cut through the snow along the access road between buildings 2 and 3. They had cleared a trench roughly 3 meters deep and 40 meters long. Halfway through the trench, one of his workers, a younger man named Gennady, broke through a compacted layer, and his shovel dropped into open space beneath the snow. Arkady said there was a cavity under the snowpack, a void, large enough that Gennady's entire arm went through before hitting anything. Arkady described the shape as tubular, roughly cylindrical, extending in both directions along the length of the trench. I told him it was probably a thermal pocket. warm air from a heat pipe beneath the road surface melting the base layer and creating a gap. It happens. Not usually at this scale, but the snowfall was unprecedented, so unusual thermal behavior was expected. Arkady agreed. His crew continued digging. At 05:58, Arkady called again. His voice was different, not panicked, controlled in a way that told me he was choosing every word. He said the tunnel was not a thermal pocket. He said it was too regular. And something inside it had moved. I asked Arkady to repeat his last statement. He did, word for word. Something in the tunnel had moved. Not shifted, not settled. Moved laterally, away from the point where Gennady had broken through, at speed. I asked if it could have been an animal. Norilsk sits at the edge of the tundra. Arctic foxes den under snow. Even the occasional wolverine. Arkady said no. He said the movement displaced snow along the tunnel wall in a line roughly 4 meters long in under 2 seconds. He said whatever moved was large. I logged the report. I did not send a secondary team. At that point, I had 7 other priority deployments queued. 2 confirmed roof collapses in the Talnakh district. And the snow was still falling at a rate that made every minute of delay operationally dangerous. An unexplained animal sighting in a snow tunnel was not my most pressing problem. I told Arkady to seal the breach point, avoid the tunnel, finish clearing the access road, and report back. He acknowledged. I want to note that between 0600 and 0730, I received 4 additional reports from separate crews operating in different districts. Each crew had encountered subsurface voids in the snowpack. The descriptions varied. 2 were tubular, like Arkady's. 1 was described as a chamber, a roughly spherical open space nearly 2 meters across, discovered when a worker's leg broke through while walking on the surface. The 4th was a network. A crew clearing a parking lot in the central district broke into an intersecting series of tunnels running in at least 3 directions. None of the other crews reported movement inside the voids. I held on to that fact. I used it to reassure myself. Arkady's sighting was singular, possibly a misidentification. Snow compresses, shifts, calves. A chunk of ice sliding down the interior of a tube in low light could look like directed movement to a tired man with a headlamp. At 07:15, I requested a thermal imaging drone from our equipment depot. I was told the drone was grounded. Wind speeds above the snowpack were gusting at 70 kilometers per hour. Nothing was flying. I requested a borehole camera, the kind we use for pipe inspections. There were 2 in inventory. 1 was checked out to the water treatment plant for scheduled maintenance. The other was in the depot. And the depot was buried under 1.5 meters of snow that had accumulated against the loading doors since my last crew left. I had tunnels under the snow across 4 districts, 1 possible movement sighting, and no way to look inside any of it. I moved on to the next crisis. That was my first mistake, not the last. At 08:04, I attempted to raise Arkady on the primary channel for a status update. No response. I tried 3 times at 2-minute intervals. Nothing. This was not immediately alarming. Radio interference during heavy snowfall is constant in Norilsk. The city sits in a valley surrounded by industrial infrastructure. The smelter stacks, the ore processing facilities, the power station, all of it generates electromagnetic noise that chews through VHF signals on good days. During a storm, blackout windows of 10 or 15 minutes are routine. I logged the contact failure and moved to other tasks. We had a partial building collapse on Komsomolskaya Street. A heating main had fractured in the Khyr district, and ambient temperatures were dropping toward -38. I had people in immediate danger of freezing, and they needed my attention more than a crew that was probably just behind a snowdrift with a blocked antenna. At 08:31, I tried Arcady again. No response. At 08:45, I reassigned a tracked vehicle crew that had just completed a roof shoring operation in Talnuk. I told them to drive to Oganer and make physical contact with Arcady's team. Their estimated transit time was 35 minutes. At 09:22, the relief crew reached Oganer. The crew leader was a woman named Yulia. I have known Yulia for 9 years. She is meticulous. She does not speculate. She reports what she sees. Yulia reported that both of Arcady's tracked vehicles were present. Engines off, lights off. The access road trench that Arcady's crew had been digging was partially refilled. New snow had accumulated roughly 60 centimeters deep in the cut. The tools were on the ground. Shovels, a pickaxe, 2 thermos bottles, personal gear gloves, a hat scattered near the trench wall. There were no crew members visible. Yulia said the snow around the trench was undisturbed in every direction. No footprints leading away. No tracks of any kind. Just smooth, fresh accumulation stretching to every horizon. 10 people gone, as if they had sunk straight down by 10 a.m. I had pulled every field crew back to the municipal building. All of them. I left the roof collapses, the fractured heat main, the stranded residents. I pulled everyone in because I could not protect people I could not account for. And accounting for them meant putting them somewhere I could see them. I had 46 workers return. I should have had 57. 11 were missing from 3 separate crews, including Arcady's 10 in Oganer. The 11th was a solo surveyor I had sent to check a communication tower on the southern ridge at 0700. He had confirmed arrival, reported the tower intact, and gone silent at 0744. 68 people in the building now. 46 field workers, 12 administrative and support staff, myself, and 9 civilians who had walked to the municipal building seeking help with heating failures in their apartments. I shut the exterior doors and told my deputy, a man named Kolya, to begin mapping every tunnel report we had received. Kolya is an engineer. Trained in Krasnoyarsk, worked pipeline infrastructure for Norilsk Nickel before switching to city services. He has the kind of mind that finds patterns in data the way some people find faces in clouds. Except his patterns are usually real. It took him 40 minutes. He plotted every reported void and tunnel on a city map using the GPS coordinates from crew reports. When he pinned the last point and stepped back, the room went quiet. The tunnels were not random. They followed the city's underground heating infrastructure almost exactly. Norilsk is built on permafrost. Every major building connects to a centralized heating network through insulated pipes that run in utilidors, covered channels beneath the surface. The tunnel system we had discovered in the snow ran directly above these utilidors, as if something had traced the heat signatures from above. Kolya said it first. He said the tunnels were following the warmth. I asked him what kind of animal maps a city's heating network in 5 hours. He didn't answer. Nobody did. I tried the HF link to Dudinka. It connected briefly. I transmitted a compressed summary. Unprecedented snowfall, subsurface tunnel network discovered, 11 personnel missing, requesting military reconnaissance and airlift support. The operator in Dudinka acknowledged receipt. He sounded distracted. I asked him to confirm he understood the severity. He said he did, but that Dudinka was dealing with its own situation. He said their snowfall totals were similar. He said they had found tunnels too. The link dropped before I could respond. I stood in the communications room for a long time after that. The map was still on the wall behind me. Norilsk and Dudinka are are 200 kilometers apart. If the same tunnel structures had appeared in both cities simultaneously, this was not a local event. Whatever was under the snow was not one animal, and it was not lost. It was everywhere. I went back to the main room and told everyone we were staying inside until I understood what we were dealing with. Nobody argued. The snow outside the windows had reached the second floor. At 11:15, one of the civilians, an older man named Victor, who had come in complaining about his radiator, asked me to come listen to something. He was standing by the north-facing wall of the ground floor, which by this point was entirely below the snow line. The windows were white. You could not see through them. The snow was pressed against the glass like earth against a basement wall. Victor said he had been standing there drinking tea when he heard something through the wall. I asked him what. He said movement, not wind, not settling, something rhythmic. I stood next to him and pressed my ear against the wall. For 30 seconds, nothing. Then I felt it before I heard it. A vibration, low frequency, traveling through the concrete, not the air. It pulsed. Roughly 2 seconds on, 1 second off, 2 seconds on. Regular, mechanical in its consistency. Except it was not mechanical. I have worked around heavy machinery my entire career. Generators, compressors, boring equipment. I know what mechanical vibration feels like through a wall. This was organic. There is a quality to biological movement that machines do not replicate, an irregularity within the regularity, a slight variation in pressure and timing that betrays living muscle rather than a piston. Something was moving through the snow directly against the exterior wall of the municipal building. Moving in a repeating pattern. Circling. I pulled Victor away from the wall quietly. I told him to sit in the center of the room and stay away from any exterior surface. Then I walked the perimeter of the entire ground floor, pressing my ear to each wall in turn. North wall, rhythmic movement, consistent with the first contact. West wall, silence. South wall, silence. East wall, a different pattern. Not rhythmic, irregular, faster, multiple sources. I pulled Kolya aside and told him what I had found. He went white. Not from fear. Kolya does not process information emotionally. He went white because the implication was structural. If something was physically pressing against the building walls through the snow, and if it was large enough to transmit vibration through 30 centimeters of reinforced concrete, then the snow surrounding us was not just weather. It was habitat. We were not snowed in. We were embedded in an active environment. Kolya asked me a question I could not answer. He asked whether the tunnels we had mapped were burrows or hunting tracks. There is a difference. A burrow is a home. A hunting track is a route. Something that burrows stays. Something that hunts moves through and comes back. I looked at the map on the wall. The tunnels followed the heat lines. They converged on buildings. They clustered at intersections where multiple utilidors met. They clustered where people were. I did not answer Kolya's question. He did not need me to. We both understood what we were looking at. At 12:40, the snow stopped falling. I know the exact time because every person in the building noticed simultaneously. The sound of heavy snowfall is so constant and so pervasive that you stop hearing it after the first hour. It becomes the baseline. When it stopped, the silence was so abrupt that 3 people stood up from their chairs as if a loud noise had startled them. The silence lasted 11 seconds. I counted. Then a new sound replaced it. A deep, settling compression, the sound of billions of tons of snow finding its final resting density. It came from everywhere at once. Above us, around us, through the floor. The building groaned. Old Soviet construction makes specific sounds under load. I know those sounds. Concrete stressed beyond its design parameters makes a ticking noise, like a cooling engine. Steel rebar under torsion hums at a frequency you feel in your teeth. The building was ticking and humming. I sent Kolya and 2 workers to inspect the roof access. They came back in 7 minutes. The roof hatch, which opens outward, would not move. The snow above it was too heavy and too compressed. We were sealed in. The ground floor doors, already blocked, were now under roughly 3 meters of consolidated snowpack. The second floor windows were our highest accessible opening, and the snow line was above them. We were, by every practical definition, buried. I took inventory. We had the building's emergency generator, which was fueled and functional. We had running water from the building's internal supply, which draws from a heated reservoir, still liquid, still pressurized. We had food supplies in the emergency store. Canned goods, dried rations, enough for perhaps 70 people for 5 or 6 days if carefully managed. We had heat because the building connects to the central system, and the power plant was still operating. I could verify this because the radiators were warm. We had communications only through the HF set, and it had not reconnected since the Dudinka call. What we did not have was a way out. I assembled everyone in the main hall and explained the situation directly. I told them the snow had stopped, but the accumulation was severe. I told them we were unable to open any exit. I told them we had supplies and heat, and that the situation, while serious, was survivable. I told them help was requested, and that Dudinka was aware of our condition. I did not tell them about the tunnels. I did not tell them about the movement against the walls. I did not tell them that 11 of our colleagues were missing without footprints. I told them we were safe inside. I believed the first part of that sentence. I was no longer sure about the second. Yulia came to me privately at 1300. She had been quiet since returning from Oganer, and I had not pressed her. Some people need time to organize what they have seen before they can speak it. She told me that her initial report from Oganer had been incomplete, not deliberately. She said she had been trying to determine what was factual and what might have been her eyes adjusting to the conditions. She had decided it was factual. When her crew arrived at the Oganer trench and found Arkadiy's team missing, she had climbed down into the partially refilled trench to inspect the site. The walls of the trench were clean vertical cuts through the compacted snow, just as a shovel would produce. But near the bottom, roughly 2.5 meters down, the texture changed. The snow at the bottom of the trench was not cut. It was smoothed, polished almost, as if something had passed through it repeatedly, compressing and glazing the surface through friction. And in that glazed surface, she found marks. She described them as parallel grooves, sets of 4 or 5, spaced roughly 15 centimeters apart, running longitudinally along the trench floor. They were shallow, perhaps 1 centimeter deep, but consistent. They extended for the entire visible length of the trench bottom before disappearing into the refilled section. I asked her what she thought made them. She said she thought they were grip marks, traction marks, like the scoring you see on ice where something with claws has pulled itself along. She said the spacing and the pattern reminded her of the marks a bear leaves when it drags a carcass across frozen ground. But the scale was wrong. The marks were too wide, the sets too far apart. Whatever left them was either much larger than a bear or had a fundamentally different body plan. She said one more thing. At the far end of the trench, Where the dug section met the undisturbed snowpack, she had found a hole in the trench floor, circular, approximately 1 meter in diameter, descending vertically into the snow below. She had shone her headlamp into it and seen that it curved after roughly 3 meters, bending horizontally toward the nearest building. She said the interior of the hole was glazed the same way, smooth, polished by passage. She said warm air was rising out of it, which made no sense because the snow should have been uniformly cold at that depth. She said the air smelled organic, not rotting, not decomposition, something else. A dense biological smell, like the inside of a living throat. I asked if she had seen anything inside the hole. She said no. But she had heard breathing, not wind through a tunnel. Breathing. Inhalation, pause, exhalation, slow, deep. Resonant in a way that suggested enormous lung capacity. She had backed out of the trench without telling her crew what she found. She told me she did not want to cause a panic until she understood what it meant. Neither did I. But I was running out of explanations that did not require the word alive. At 1420, the thing in the wall touched us. I do not mean that metaphorically. The north wall of the ground floor, the same wall where Victor and I had heard the rhythmic movement 3 hours earlier, deformed inward. Not dramatically, not catastrophically. A section roughly 2 meters wide and 1 meter tall bowed inward by approximately 4 centimeters. The plaster over the concrete cracked in a spiderweb pattern. Dust fell from the ceiling above the deformation. Everyone in the room saw it. 20 people were sitting within direct line of sight. The deformation held for 6 seconds. Then it relaxed. The wall did not return to its original position. The plaster was cracked, the concrete slightly displaced, but the pressure withdrew. The bulge reduced to maybe 1 centimeter of permanent deflection. Nobody screamed. I want the record to reflect that. 68 people in a building that just flexed inward, and nobody screamed. They went silent. The silence of people who are waiting for an explanation from the person in charge before they decide whether to be terrified. I had 6 seconds to come up with that explanation. I told them that compacted snow exerts lateral pressure on structures, similar to soil pressure on a retaining wall. I told them the unprecedented depth of snow outside was creating forces that the building was designed to resist, but that might cause minor cosmetic damage. I told them the deformation was within expected parameters. I lied. I lied cleanly and confidently, and with the full authority of my position, because the alternative was 68 people trying to flee a building they could not leave, through snow that contained something I could not explain. The lie held for 14 minutes. At 1434, the east wall produced a different kind of event. Not a slow bow, an impact, a single, sharp lateral blow that cracked the concrete from floor to ceiling and sent a section of interior shelving crashing to the ground. The overhead lights flickered. A woman, one of the civilians, fell from her chair. The sound was enormous. Not a crack or a bang. A deep, percussive thud, like a massive drum hit from outside. The kind of sound you feel in your sternum. I could not explain that as snow pressure. Nobody was going to believe that snow punched a wall. Kolya was already at the damage site. He ran his hand along the crack and looked back at me. The crack pattern radiated from a central impact point roughly 1 meter above the floor. The concrete at the center was not just cracked. It was compressed, pushed inward and compacted in a way that left a shallow concavity in the wall's interior surface. Whatever hit the wall had hit it with focused, directed force, not distributed pressure. A strike, intentional and localized. The room was no longer silent. People were talking, standing, moving toward the center of the building and away from the walls. I could feel the collective decision forming before anyone spoke it. We needed to go up. Away from the ground floor, away from the snow line, away from the walls that something was testing. I ordered everyone to the 3rd floor. We moved in under 3 minutes. I do not think anyone has ever climbed stairs that fast in Norilsk. On the 3rd floor, above the snow line, we had windows that looked out onto open air. The view was staggering and alien. Where Norilsk should have been a city of concrete towers, industrial stacks, roads, vehicles, there was a white plain. A featureless expanse of snow broken only by the upper floors of the tallest buildings, rising from the surface like islands in a frozen ocean. The smokestacks of the smelter were visible to the west, still venting. The power station cooling towers to the south. Between them, nothing. The city was gone, buried completely. Kolya and I stood at a window and talked quietly while everyone else settled into the open office spaces of the 3rd floor. He had a theory, and I needed to hear it, even though I knew I would not like it. He said the tunnels, the voids, the movement pattern, all of it pointed toward a burrowing predator. Something adapted to living inside deep snowpack. Something that used the snow the way a marine predator uses water, as a 3-dimensional environment for hunting. He said the heat-following behavior suggested it located prey by thermal signature. Buildings full of people would read as massive heat concentrations. The circling behavior, the rhythmic movement I had felt through the wall was consistent with assessment. Testing the perimeter, gauging the barrier. I asked him, what kind of animal does this? He said no known kind. He said if he had to speculate, and he emphasized that he hated speculating. The behavior profile was closest to something between a mole and a polar predator, something that evolved to hunt in conditions of extreme snowpack, something that might have always existed in deep permafrost tundra environments but never encountered human settlements before, because human settlements had never been buried deeply enough to enter its habitat. I said Norilsk has been here since the 1930s. He said Norilsk had never been under 5 meters of snow. He said we had always been above the line. Now we were below it. We were not on the surface anymore. We were in the snow. And in the snow, something was already home. I asked how large. He said the wall impact suggested something capable of exerting several tons of focused force. The tunnel diameter, roughly 1 meter, suggested a body width that could range from 70 centimeters to over a meter if the creature compressed itself during transit. The traction marks Yulia described suggested multiple limbs or appendages providing grip. He could not estimate length. He said it could be 3 meters. It could be 15. Without visual confirmation, he was guessing. He said one more thing. He said the tunnels converged on buildings, but also connected buildings to each other. Whatever this was, it had built a network, not random paths, a system. And systems implied intelligence, not human intelligence, not conscious planning, but the functional intelligence of something that constructs optimized hunting infrastructure. I asked Kolya to stop speculating after that. He agreed it was a good idea. At 1500, the HF set reconnected, not to Dudinka. The signal we received was a general broadcast on the emergency frequency originating from Krasnoyarsk Regional Command, 1,500 kilometers to the south. The message was automated, repeating on a loop. I will transcribe it exactly as I heard it. Attention all stations in Krasnoyarsk Krai. This is Regional Emergency Command. A severe weather event of unknown origin has affected multiple population centers across the northern and central territories. Snowfall totals exceeding historical maximums have been recorded in Norilsk, Dudinka, Igarka, Turkhansk, and outlying settlements. All affected areas are instructed to shelter in place. Do not attempt surface travel. Do not attempt to clear snow from ground level exits. Repeat. Do not clear snow from ground level exits. Military and civil aviation assets are being mobilized. Estimated response time, unknown. Additional guidance will follow. End message. The message repeated. I listened to it 4 times to make sure I had the wording right. 2 phrases stood out. Do not attempt to clear snow from ground level exits. That was not standard severe weather guidance. Standard guidance says stay indoors, conserve heat, await rescue. It does not specifically warn you against digging out. That warning only makes sense if someone at Regional Command knew that the snow was not just deep, that there was a reason to stay away from it, that something was wrong at ground level. The second phrase, estimated response time, unknown. Regional Command does not say unknown. They say 24 hours, 48 hours, 72 hours. They give a number even if the number is optimistic. Unknown means they either cannot reach us or have not decided whether to try. Unknown means we are on our own for a duration that nobody will commit to. I broadcast a response on the same frequency. I identified our position, our personnel count, our supply status, and our structural situation. I described the tunnel system, the wall impacts, the missing crews. I asked for direct communication with a human operator. I received the automated loop again. I broadcast a second time. Same information, more urgency. I described the wall deformation. I described Yulia's findings in the trench. I said the words out loud for the first time. We believe there is a large predatory organism operating within the snowpack, and it is actively engaging with occupied structures. The loop played again. I turned to Kolya. He was looking at the automated message transcript I had written out. He pointed to the list of affected cities: Norilsk, Dudinka, Igarka, Turukhansk. All of them in the far north. All of them in the deep snow zone. All of them, as of this morning, buried. He said if each of those cities was experiencing what we were experiencing, then Regional Command was not ignoring us. They were overwhelmed. They were receiving the same reports from every buried settlement across 1,000 kilometers of territory. And they had given the only instruction they could: stay inside, do not dig, do not go into the snow. Because the snow was occupied. I turned off the HF set. Not because I'd given up on communication. Because the automated loop was demoralizing everyone who could hear it. And morale was the only resource I could not restock. At 16:10, we heard the screaming. It did not come from inside our building. It came from outside, from below, from somewhere in the snow to our north, roughly in the direction of the residential blocks on Leninsky Prospect. Sound carries strangely in dense snowpack. It deadens high frequencies and transmits low frequencies with disturbing clarity. What reached us through the third-floor windows, the only openings above the snow line, was not a clear human voice. It was the low-frequency component of a scream, the harmonic undertone, the part you feel rather than hear. It carried across the white plain like a vibration in a wire. Multiple voices, overlapping, sustained for approximately 90 seconds. Then silence. Not gradual, instantaneous. Every voice stopped at the same moment, as if someone had closed a door on the sound. I looked out the window. The snow surface between our building and the Leninsky blocks, a distance of perhaps 300 meters, was no longer flat. It was moving, not uniformly, in lines. Parallel tracks of disturbance running just beneath the surface, like the wakes of boats in still water. I counted at least 6 separate tracks, all moving in the same direction, away from the residential blocks and toward the east, toward the industrial quarter. They moved fast. I would estimate 40 to 50 kilometers per hour. In under 15 seconds, the tracks had crossed the visible field and disappeared beyond the smelter complex. The surface went still again, smooth, unmarked, as if nothing had passed through it. I turned from the window and found the entire room staring at me. Every face carried the same expression. Not terror, something worse, comprehension. They had heard the screaming. They had seen me watching the surface. They understood what had just happened, even though nobody said it. Something had entered one of the residential buildings on Leninsky Prospect. A building full of people who were sheltering in place, who were following correct protocol, who were doing exactly what the emergency broadcast told them to do. And something had come through the wall or the floor or the buried windows, and it had taken them. The screaming had lasted 90 seconds. That was the duration of an entire building's resistance. I do not know how many people were in those blocks. Leninsky residential houses between 200 and 400 residents per building. If multiple buildings were hit simultaneously, the number could be over 1,000. I have no way to confirm. I have no way to reach them. I have no way to help. I stood in front of the room and told people what I had seen. I did not soften it. I told them the snow surface had shown movement consistent with multiple large organisms traveling at high speed away from the Leninsky district. I told them the screaming had stopped. I told them I believed a predation event had occurred. A woman named Irina asked me to use the real word. She said she was an adult and she did not need management language. I said people had been killed. Irina nodded. She sat down. She pulled her coat tighter around her shoulders. I assigned Kolya and 2 others to begin a structural assessment of every wall, floor, and window on the ground and second floors. I told them to identify the weakest points, the places where something that could dent 30 centimeters of concrete might eventually break through. They came back in 40 minutes with a list of 11 vulnerable points. We had enough furniture in the building to barricade 9 of them. We started moving desks. At 1800, the heating failed, not gradually. The radiators went from warm to cold in under 10 minutes. The central heating system in Norilsk is powered by the TETs, one combined heat and power plant, which feeds pressurized hot water through a network of insulated mains. The system has operated continuously, even through the worst winters since 1942. It does not just stop, it stopped. The implications were immediate and lethal. Norilsk in March, without heating at night, is not survivable for long. Exterior temperatures were projected at -41. Even inside a concrete building without active heating, the interior temperature would drop below 0 within 2 hours, below -10 within 4. Hypothermia onset in an unheated concrete structure at these temperatures begins at roughly the 6-hour mark for a healthy adult in winter clothing. I had 68 people in a concrete box that was about to become a freezer. Kolya understood what the heating failure meant before I said it. The power plant was either damaged or taken. If it was taken if the organisms had reached it through the snow, then the heating mains would cool. The hot water in the utilidors would freeze, and within hours, the pipes themselves would burst. After that, even if the plant was restored, the distribution network would be destroyed. No heat for Norilsk. Not today, not for weeks. We had the emergency generator. It could power lights and the HF set, but it produced no meaningful heat for a building this size. We had 68 bodies in winter clothing. Human metabolism generates roughly 100 watts per person at rest. 6,800 watts in a sealed room would provide some warming, but not enough to offset the thermal bleed through concrete walls backed by 5 meters of snow at -40. I made a decision I'd been avoiding. I ordered everyone into the smallest interior room on the 3rd floor, a records archive, roughly 6 meters by 8 meters. No exterior walls, one door. It would be cramped. It would be uncomfortable. It would also be the most thermally retainable space in the building. And it had no wall surfaces exposed to the snowpack. People moved without complaint. There is a specific kind of compliance that emerges when a group collectively recognizes that the person giving orders is the only reason they are still alive. It is not trust exactly. It is a practical surrender of autonomy to whoever seems most likely to keep them breathing. I felt the weight of it. I still feel it. We sealed the archive room, hung blankets across the door frame for insulation, pulled every coat, curtain, and carpet scrap we could find into the space. 68 people in 48 square meters. Body heat raised the temperature to roughly 8 degrees within the first 30 minutes. Cold. Deeply uncomfortable, but survivable. The generator sat in the hallway outside, running on its fuel reserve. I calculated we had 18 hours of fuel. After that, no lights, no radio, no communication of any kind. Just body heat in a dark room, while something circled outside, in a frozen city. I sat by the door with the HF handset on my lap and waited. At 2100, someone knocked on the ground floor exterior door. I know how that sounds. We were buried under meters of snow. The ground floor was entirely below the snow line. There was no surface access to the exterior doors. No one should have been able to reach them. Someone knocked. 3 times. Slow, deliberate. The sound traveled up the stairwell to the 3rd floor with perfect clarity in the frozen, silent building. I left the archive room and went to the stairwell. Kolya followed. We stood on the 3rd floor landing and listened. 3 more knocks. Same rhythm, same door. Then a voice, muffled by the door and the snow beyond it, but audible. A man's voice, speaking Russian, saying, "Please open the door," saying he was from the Leninsky district, saying he had escaped, saying he was freezing, saying, "Please." Kolya grabbed my arm, not to stop me from going down. I was not moving. He grabbed my arm because his hand was shaking and he needed to hold on to something. The voice knew things. It said the correct district name. It said the name of the building manager on Leninsky Block 4, Pavel Grigorievich. It said it had been in apartment 4-12 when the floor collapsed. It said it ran. It said it dug through the snow for hours. It said please, over and over. I did not go downstairs. I did not answer. I stood on the landing and listened, and I want this log to reflect why I did not respond. The ground floor door is buried under 3 meters of consolidated snow. There is no air pocket in front of it. We confirmed this hours ago. The snow is pressed directly against every ground-level surface. For a person to be standing in front of that door, they would need to be inside the snowpack. They would need to have tunneled to it. In the dark, in -40 temperatures, without tools, without a heat source, through compacted snow, or they would need to already be in the tunnels. The voice continued for 11 minutes. It added details. It described the layout of the apartment. It described the color of the wallpaper in the hallway. It said the name of a child, Masha, and asked if Masha had made it here. I felt the pull. The voice was desperate and specific and human. Every instinct told me that a person was dying on the other side of that door, and I was letting it happen. but the voice had no breath vapor. I know this because there was no condensation forming on the interior side of the stairwell walls near the ground floor. At these temperatures, a living human breathing against or near the exterior door would produce enough moisture to leave visible condensation on the cold interior surfaces. Physics demands it. There was nothing. The air in the stairwell was bone dry. Whatever was making that voice was not breathing. At 21:11, the knocking stopped. The voice stopped. Silence returned. I stayed on the landing for another 20 minutes, watching, listening. Nothing. I went back to the archive room and told everyone that the building had settled and the sounds they heard were thermal contraction. Another lie. The lies were getting easier. That frightened me more than the knocking. The hours between midnight and 4 a.m. were the worst of my life. And I've survived a mine collapse that killed 9 of my friends. The temperature in the archive room stabilized at 6 degrees. Cold enough to see your breath. Cold enough that no one slept. People sat pressed against each other for warmth, speaking quietly or not at all. The generator hummed outside the door. The building was silent except for the deep, irregular groaning of a structure under thermal stress. At 01:30, the groaning changed. It developed a rhythm, the same 2-on, 1-off pattern I had heard through the north wall that morning. Something was circling the building again. But this time, the vibration was not just against the walls. It was beneath us, under the building's foundation. I could feel it through the floor. Kolya felt it too. He pulled me to the corner of the room and whispered. He said the utilidor running beneath our building was the main trunk line for the central district. 2 meters in diameter, insulated concrete. Now that the hot water had cooled and possibly drained, the utilidor was a dry tunnel running directly beneath our foundation. It was an access corridor. He said if the organisms were using the heat infrastructure as a navigation network above ground, there was no reason they would ignore the infrastructure below ground. We were barricaded on the 3rd floor. We had reinforced 9 weak points on the ground and second floors. We had not considered the basement. We had not considered that the building's own infrastructure connections were entry points. I sent 2 men to check the basement access. They came back in 4 minutes, walking fast, but not running. Controlled. The basement door was intact. The basement itself was dark. The emergency lighting on that level had failed. They had used a flashlight. The floor of the basement was wet, not from flooding, from condensation. The air in the basement was warm, significantly warmer than the rest of the building. Warm and humid, with a biological smell that they described independently, without conferring, using the same word Yulia had used. Like breath. I ordered the basement door sealed. We moved a filing cabinet in front of it, then a desk, then everything we could stack. The pile reached the ceiling. It was not enough. I knew it was not enough. A filing cabinet does not stop something that dense reinforced concrete, but it was what we had. In that archive room, with 68 people breathing clouds of vapor in the cold, listening to something pulse beneath the floor, I understood something that I think is important to record. The fear was not the worst part. Fear is active. Fear is electric. Fear keeps you thinking. The worst part was the helplessness. Knowing that every decision I had made pulling the crews in, going up, sealing the room was correct and also insufficient. I had done everything right, and we were still prey. The floor vibrated. The lights flickered. The dark pressed in. We counted the hours. At 04:17, the basement door failed. The sound was unlike anything I can compare to. The filing cabinet, the desk, the stacked furniture, all of it moved as a unit. not pushed, displaced, flung into the hallway outside the archive room with a force that embedded the desk legs into the opposite wall. The basement door itself was not opened. It was removed, torn from its frame and hurled upward through the stairwell, where it struck the second-floor ceiling and fell. The hallway outside our archive room was now open to the basement. Warm air flooded upward. I felt it through the blanket over the door frame, a wave of humidity and heat that was obscene in the context of a building at 6 degrees. The biological smell came with it, dense, thick, the smell of something alive and enormous and close. I do not know what I expected to hear. A roar, the scrabble of claws on concrete, something cinematic and identifiable. What I heard was silence, complete silence. The generator outside had stopped, whether killed by the impact or starved of fuel, I do not know. The building's groaning had ceased. Even the wind outside, which had been a constant presence at the third-floor windows, was still. Silence. And then, from the stairwell below us, a sound I will carry for the rest of whatever life I have left. Breathing. Slow, deep. The inhalation lasted 4 or 5 seconds. The exhalation slightly longer. Each breath moved air up the stairwell with enough volume that the blanket over our door shifted inward, then outward, in time with the rhythm. The thing was breathing, and its lungs were large enough that its respiration physically moved the air in a 3-story stairwell. I was standing at the door. I was the only thing between the archive room and the hallway. I could have closed the actual door. The archive room had a solid interior door, not just the blanket. But closing it would have meant letting the blanket fall. And for the 2 seconds the hallway was exposed, I would be looking down a dark corridor toward a stairwell that contained something I could not see and could not fight. I closed the door. In those 2 seconds, I saw nothing in the hallway. Only darkness. Only the warm, wet airs pulsing from below. But I heard the breathing change. The rhythm stuttered, as if the thing had noticed. As if the small act of closing a door had registered as movement, as warmth, as the signature of living prey behind a barrier it had not yet tested. I pressed my back against the door. 67 people behind me. Every face visible in the emergency flashlight someone had switched on. Every face looking at me. Children held against parents' chests. Old Victor sitting on the floor with his tea thermos clutched like a talisman. Yulia standing near the back, her jaw set, her hands steady. The breathing outside the door continued. Inhalation, exhalation. Each cycle pushing and pulling the door against my back. I could feel the warmth of it through the metal. Something alive was exhaling against the other side of the door. And its breath was warm. And its breath smelled like the inside of a body. I braced my feet. I held the door. There was nothing else to do. Kolya moved beside me without a word. Then Yulia. Then a man whose name I did not know. Then another. 12 people pressed against the door with me, shoulder to shoulder, adding their weight to the barrier. The breathing slowed, then stopped, then resumed. Farther away, moving down, back toward the basement. The thing had not pushed the door. I do not know why. We did not move from that position until dawn. At 07:42 on March 10th, I saw daylight through the archive room's interior transom window, reflected off the hallway wall outside. Dawn had come. It did not feel like salvation. It felt like a fact. The sky did not care what had happened in the dark. It just turned. I left the door in Kolya's hands and moved through the building alone. The hallway was empty. The basement stairwell gaped open, The door gone, the barricades scattered. The air was cold again, bitterly cold. Whatever warmth the thing had brought with it had dissipated. The biological smell lingered but was fading, like the memory of a presence rather than the presence itself. The basement was silent, dark. I did not go down. I went to the third-floor windows. The sun was low on the horizon, turning the snowfield orange and pink. The surface was undisturbed, flat, beautiful, in the way that only truly dangerous landscapes can be beautiful. The smelter stacks were still venting. The power station towers still stood. The upper floors of buildings broke the white plain like monuments. Nothing moved on the surface. Nothing moved below it, as far as I could see. But I could see new features that had not been there the previous day. Holes, circular openings in the snow surface, each roughly a meter across, scattered across the visible field. Some near buildings, some in open spaces between structures. There were dozens visible from my window, perhaps hundreds across the city. The tunnel network had breached the surface overnight. The thing or things had opened exits, ventilation points, access routes, or they were done hunting below and had moved on. I did not know which interpretation was correct. I still do not. At 0800, I powered the HF set using a hand crank emergency backup. The main generator was dead. I transmitted on the emergency frequency and received, for the first time, a human voice, not automated. A man, identifying himself as a military communications officer at a forward staging base near Yeniseisk, approximately 900 kilometers south. He told me that military aviation assets had been mobilized. Helicopters were en route to Norilsk and other affected cities. Estimated arrival, 4 to 6 hours, weather dependent. He told me that satellite imagery confirmed total burial of the Norilsk urban area under approximately 6 meters of consolidated snow. He asked about survivors. I told him I had 68 confirmed alive in the municipal building. I told him about the Leninsky screaming and my estimate of potential casualties. I told him about the organisms. There was a long pause. Then he said that reports from other buried cities described similar phenomena. He said the word organisms as if he had already heard it today. Multiple times, from multiple sources, he said search and rescue protocols were being revised to account for, and here he paused again, subsurface hazards. I asked him to send the helicopters as fast as possible. He said he would. I turned off the radio to save the crank battery and went back to the archive room. The helicopters arrived at 1400. 3 Mi-8 transports, military markings, descending through clear skies toward the municipal building's rooftop. I had spent the morning organizing the roof access. The hatch was still frozen shut from above, but Kolya and 4 others spent 2 hours chipping through the ice seal with fire axes and a pry bar from the maintenance closet. By noon, we had the hatch open. The roof was covered in 70 centimeters of snow, which we cleared by hand in shifts, working in 2-minute rotations because the wind chill at roof level was -52, and exposed skin began to freeze in under 90 seconds. The first helicopter landed at 1407. The crew chief jumped out and immediately began assessing our group. He was efficient, professional, and visibly shaken. He told me they had already extracted survivors from 2 other buildings in the Talnakh district. He said some buildings they had reached were empty. I asked what he meant by empty. He said the buildings were intact, doors closed, no structural damage visible from the air. But when they breached the rooftops and entered, there was nobody inside. Food on tables, clothes hanging, television still on in some apartments, powered by generators. Everyone gone. He said in one building they found marks on the floor, drag marks, leading to a hole in the basement floor that had not been part of the original construction. He said the hole was smooth inside, polished. I told him I understood. We loaded the first helicopter with 34 people, the civilians, the injured, the elderly. Victor climbed in last, still holding his thermos. The helicopter lifted off and banked south. The second helicopter took another 28. Yulia was in that group. Before she climbed in, she gripped my arm and said one sentence. She said, "It let us go." I asked what she meant. She said the thing in the basement had breached our building, reached our door, and withdrawn. It was capable of pushing through reinforced concrete. An interior archive door with 12 people bracing it would not have stopped it. It chose to leave. She said she did not know what that meant, and that not knowing was worse than any answer she could imagine. She was right. I have thought about that every hour since. The third helicopter took the remaining 6, myself, Kolya, and 4 others. As we lifted off, I looked down at Norilsk. The city I had lived in for 31 years was invisible. A white plain with rooftops. The circular holes dotted the surface in every direction, extending beyond the city limits into the open tundra, where there were no buildings, no heat lines, nothing to hunt. The holes went on for kilometers. They went on as far as I could see. I tapped the pilot's shoulder and pointed. He looked. He nodded. He said every city was the same. He said the holes were everywhere. He said some of them were opening in places that had never been buried. He said the snow was still falling farther north. We landed at the forward staging base near Yeniseisk at 17:30. The base was a converted airfield, now operating as a processing center for evacuees from across the northern territories. I saw hundreds of people in thermal blankets sitting in rows inside a heated hangar. Military personnel moved between them with water, rations, medical kits. The operation was professional and organized, and completely overwhelmed. A debriefing officer took my statement. He recorded everything: the tunnels, the wall impacts, the breathing, the knocking, the Leninsky event. He did not interrupt. He did not express skepticism. He wrote it down the way a man writes something he has already heard 50 times that day. When I finished, I asked him for the casualty figures. He looked at me for a long time. Then he said the figures were preliminary and would not be released until a verification was complete. I said I was the Chief Infrastructure Coordinator for Norilsk Municipal Emergency Services, and I was formally requesting the operational count. He told me, Norilsk population, approximately 170,000. Confirmed evacuated as of 1700, 9,412. Confirmed deceased through recovered remains, 0. Confirmed unaccounted for and presumed dead, over 160,000. I asked how the presumed dead count could be that high with a 0 recovered remains. He said that was the core problem. They had entered dozens of buildings across the city. Some had survivors, like mine. Most were empty. No bodies, no blood, no remains of any kind. Just empty buildings and polished holes in the floors. The organisms, he used my word, organisms, without hesitation, had taken people and left nothing behind. Not bones, not clothing, nothing. 160,000 people had been removed from their homes, pulled into the snow, and consumed or taken so thoroughly that no physical trace remained. I sat in that hangar and tried to process a number. 160,000. The population of a city, my neighbors, my colleagues, the families of my workers, the people in the Leninsky blocks whose screaming I heard. The workers I sent into the field that morning, Arkady, Gennady, the solo surveyor on the southern ridge. All of them in the snow. All of them gone. I think about the knocking on the ground floor door, the voice that said the name Masha, whether there ever was a Masha, whether the thing that mimicked a human voice learned those names from the people it had already taken, pulling words and memories from them the way it pulled heat from the pipes. I do not want to think about that. I cannot stop. It is now 2200 on March 10th. I am recording this final entry from a cot in the evacuation hangar. They gave me a blanket and a bowl of kasha and told me to sleep. I cannot sleep. Every time I close my eyes, I feel the breathing through the door. I am making this recording because I do not trust the institutions above me to release this information honestly or quickly. The debriefing officer was thorough, but he was also careful. He asked me twice whether I wanted to amend my statement. He asked me whether the stress of the situation might have affected my perception. He was not dismissing what I told him. He was building a framework for others to dismiss it later if they chose to. Norilsk is not the only city. Dudinka, Igarka, Turukhansk. The automated broadcast listed them all. The pilot said every city was the same. The debriefing officer did not deny this. The snow fell across the entire northern territory, and beneath it, something hunted. I want to record what I believe, based on what I observed. Not what I can prove. What I believe. I believe the organisms are indigenous to the deep permafrost environment of the Siberian North. I believe they have existed for a very long time, possibly longer than human habitation in the region. I believe the unprecedented snowfall, whether natural or triggered by climatic shifts, created conditions that brought human settlements into their habitat for the first time. We sank into their world. They did not rise into ours. I believe they are intelligent in a functional, predatory sense. They mapped our heat infrastructure within hours. They built a coordinated tunnel network. They tested structures before breaching them. They used mimicry. They chose when to attack and when to withdraw. I believe the one that entered our building chose not to kill us. I do not believe this was mercy. I believe we were not worth the effort, or we were being saved for later, or something about our behavior, the barricade, the numbers, the resistance, made us less efficient prey than isolated individuals in undefended apartments. I believe it made a calculation. That is more frightening than rage. I believe the holes in the surface mean the organisms are no longer confined to the snowpack. I believe the pilot was right. The holes are appearing in areas that were never buried. If they originated in the deep snow, they are spreading beyond it. I believe this recording may be the most complete first-hand account of the first 24 hours. I am making copies. I am giving one to the military, one to a journalist I spoke to on a satellite phone 20 minutes ago, and one I will keep. My name is Daniil Volkov. I was the chief infrastructure coordinator for the city of Norilsk. Norilsk is gone. 160,000 people are gone. Something took them through the snow, and nothing was left behind. The snow is still falling in the north. March 12th, 2 days after extraction, I am at the Yeniseisk staging base, which is now operating beyond capacity. Evacuees continue to arrive from northern settlements. The hangar holds over 4,000 people. A second hangar was opened yesterday. A tent city is growing on the western edge of the airfield. The official story from Moscow is a severe Arctic weather event compounded by infrastructure failure. The word organisms has not appeared in any public statement. The casualty figures have not been released. The northern territories have been designated a restricted military zone. and all civilian air traffic north of the 64th parallel has been suspended. I spoke with the journalist again. She is based in Krasnoyarsk. She told me her editor will not publish my account, not because he doubts it, because he received a call from someone in the Federal Press Office who suggested that unverified survivor testimony during an ongoing emergency response could constitute public endangerment under Article 207. She told me she is keeping the recording. She said she will publish it when the time is right. I told her the time is now. She said she knows. She said she is sorry. The snow line is moving south. This is the development that has changed the operational picture in the last 48 hours. The anomalous snowfall that buried the northern cities has not stopped. It has expanded. As of this morning, Yeniseisk itself has received 30 centimeters of snow. That is unusual for mid-March, but not alarming by local standards. What is alarming is the forecast. The Meteorological Office in Krasnoyarsk is projecting continued heavy snowfall across central Siberia for the next 72 hours, with accumulations potentially reaching 100 centimeters or more. And the holes are appearing here. A military patrol found 2 of them yesterday morning on the eastern perimeter of the airfield. Circular, 1 meter diameter, smooth interior, descending vertically into the ground. There is no snowpack here deep enough to contain the tunnel systems we saw in Norilsk, but the holes are forming anyway, punching through frozen soil as if something is boring upward from below. Kolya saw the report before it was classified. He came to me with that same white-faced expression. He said what I was already thinking. The organisms did not originate in the snow. They originated in the permafrost. The deep, ancient permafrost that underlies all of Siberia. The snow was just the medium that allowed them to reach the surface. Now that they have reached it, they do not need the snow anymore. They are in the ground. They have always been in the ground. We built our cities on top of them, and now they are awake. March 14th. I have left the staging base. Kolya and I are traveling south in a civilian vehicle we obtained from an evacuee who no longer needed it. He did not need it because he was boarding a military transport to Moscow. He gave me his keys and told me to drive as far south as the fuel would take me. We are currently on the M54, south of Krasnoyarsk. The road is passable but deteriorating. Snow is falling, not the catastrophic volumes of the north, not yet, but steady, accumulating, covering the landscape in a layer that thickens every hour. Military convoys pass us heading north. We have passed 3 civilian convoys heading south. The radio in the car picks up Krasnoyarsk FM stations. They are broadcasting normally. Music, advertisements, weather reports that mention snow but not danger. The official information environment has not changed. The restricted zone is described as a weather emergency. There is no mention of evacuations, casualties, or subsurface phenomena. I am recording this on a handheld device while Kolya drives. I do not know how to distribute it. The journalist's editor will not publish. The military classification prevents official channels. The internet in this region has been intermittent for 2 days. Whether from infrastructure damage or intentional throttling, I cannot determine. But I am going to try something. At the next fuel stop, I'm going to find any broadcast facility I can, amateur radio, community FM, anything with a transmitter and a signal, and I am going to play this recording. The whole thing, from the beginning. The weather, the tunnels, the breathing, the count. If you are hearing this, it means I found one. If you are hearing this, I need you to understand. This is not a story. This is a first-hand operational account of an event that killed over 160,000 people in a single night and is spreading southward through the permafrost substrate of the Siberian continent. The organisms are real. They are in the ground. They follow heat. They are intelligent. They take people whole and leave nothing. If you are in a region where snowfall is increasing beyond seasonal norms, do not shelter at ground level. Go high. Go to the highest floor of the strongest structure you can find. Seal the lower levels. Block the basement. Stay away from the walls. Stay together. Stay warm, but understand that your warmth is what draws them. Do not open the door for voices you recognize. Do not dig into the snow. Do not trust the silence. My name is Daniil Volkov. I was the infrastructure coordinator for Norilsk. The snow is falling where you are. Listen carefully. Stay above the ground.